Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, the articles, the research, the notes you share, and we really dig into them.
Yeah, we try to find those key insights, the important takeaways. Think of it as your shortcut to getting up to speed on something specific.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into some fascinating source material a listener sent over. It's excerpts from Good Power by Ginni Rometty, the former IBM CEO.
And this book, it's not quite what you might expect, is it? Not just a standard corporate memoir.
No, definitely not. It uses her own life story, which had some really tough starts,
Right.
to explore these ideas about what she calls good power, how you can approach work, leadership, even making a difference.
Yeah, and the book lays out this kind of path. It talks about moving from the power of me, which is all about that personal drive and resilience,
Okay.
then to the power of we, focusing on teamwork, building belief in others, and finally, the power of us, which looks at broader societal impact. We're going to unpack lessons from all those stages based on what's in the source.
It sounds like a journey covering everything from like personal grit to big strategic thinking and this focus on skills that keeps coming up.
Absolutely. Skills versus just credentials. That's a big theme later on.
Okay, so let's get into it. Where does the source start her story? The foundation.
It kicks off with a really powerful, a really stark moment, actually. She's 16, she's in the garage, and she overhears her mom basically begging her dad for money.
Oh, wow. And his response,
Yeah.
the source quotes it, and it's just brutal.
It is. He essentially says he'll never give her anything, uses horrible language about working on the street, and just leaves, drives off.
Leaving her mom, what, 34?
Ah.
With 4 kids, no money, no education beyond high school, 0 work experience, just completely abandoned.
Total abandonment. But the source really highlights her mother's reaction. It wasn't paralysis, it was immediate action.
Right. What did she do?
She enrolled in community college, basic accounting, some early computing courses, found 2 jobs. The book frames it as her mother showing this power to create opportunity even out of absolute desperation.
Wow.
Though it does mention it was a real struggle for her, getting back into studying after being out of school for so long.
I can only imagine. But what also struck me reading this bit was the community support.
Oh, huge. Yeah. The father leaves, but the family and the neighborhood, they just sort of wrap around them.
Her grandmother, Baba, Grandma Mary, aunts, uncles, cousins. The source lists them out. They brought money. They helped with practical things like laying sod, painting floors.
Even friends' families chipped in. There's a mention of Gina's family, another neighbor offering grapefruit. It paints a picture of real, tangible community support holding them together.
That context really shaped her childhood, didn't it? Lower middle class, first in Bellwood, then Glen Ellen. Shared bedrooms, no vacations.
Yeah, the limitations were clear, and the father's absence was constant.
But it wasn't all hardship. The source balances it, talks about the freedom kids had then playing outside, the community pool, a homemade ice rink someone built.
And that interesting point about not feeling poor in Bellwood because everyone was kind of in the same boat,
Right.
but feeling it much more sharply later in Glen Ellen, where the wealth differences were more obvious.
That environment must have fueled her work ethic. The source mentions her working the post office night shift during college.
Yeah, purely for the money, dealing with a horrible supervisor, feeling sick.
Yeah.
It just shows this intense early drive for financial independence.
She says it explicitly right. Never wanted to be in a position where I couldn't take care of myself financially.
Exactly. A direct lesson from her mother's experience, you feel.
And alongside that drive, there was this early interest in tech and learning. She liked math, ended up in engineering and computer science at Northwestern, got hooked on programming assembler, specifically. The source says the logic and creativity just clicked for her. Summer jobs formatting computer tapes, a women in engineering program. It all built this habit of continuous learning. She calls it a foundational behavior.
How did she handle the emotional fallout from things like her father leaving? The source mentions resilience.
Yeah, it talks about compartmentalizing, sort of building walls around the bad stuff, the father situation, a tough time in her sorority to stay focused on moving forward.
So seeing struggles as survival, not loss.
Exactly. Though she admits to being secretly quite hard on herself, kind of pessimistic, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. But actively choosing not to dwell on bad things, that feels like a learned skill, not just how she was born.
That makes sense. Okay, so she takes that resilience, that drive, that tech interest into the workforce, starting at IBM.
Right. She interviews with a guy named John Kennedy, and she's intrigued not just by programming, but by how IBM used tech for big businesses. She saw a potential career path there, and she got some pretty blunt feedback early on.
Oh, yeah. Famously tough feedback on her presentations. Things like, don't read the charts. If you don't love your topic, we won't. And being told to work on her FARs.
Fars.
Features, advantages, reactions. It was apparently a standard IBM sales technique back then for understanding client needs.
Okay, so how did she react to that feedback?
This is where it gets interesting. She didn't get defensive. She became, in her words, a student of compelling communications.
Ah, but she studied it.
Totally. Looked for patterns, aimed for simple structures like 3 main points, use stories, focused on being authentic, even vulnerable, using wit.
The source has those anecdotes, right, about giving a speech with mismatched shoes or her scarf falling off.
Yeah, and just learning to power through, stay focused on the message despite the distractions. She even stopped using slides eventually to be more present. That deliberate effort to master communication really stands out.
So that continuous learning applied to soft skills too, not just tech.
Absolutely. And she learned the IBM sales methodology, building rapport, funneling needs, the FAR approach. She mentions key mentors too. John Nern taught her, always keep your promise.
Simple but powerful.
And Pat O'Brien gave feedback on her appearance, which she notes was kind of a reality check about the judgments women still faced.
And wasn't there a nickname? Red Pen Rometty.
Huh? Yes. Because she was such a perfectionist, always marking things up. But the source highlights a learning moment where she realized she had to step back sometimes.
Let others execute, even if it wasn't exactly how she'd do it.
Right. Build their confidence, take the red pen away, essentially. That must have been hard for a perfectionist.
I bet. So this period really set those foundations. Continuous learning, building that mosaic of mentors by just asking people.
Yeah, being open about wanting to learn, becoming T-shaped, deep expertise, but broad business knowledge, too.
And relationships seem like a constant thread, personal ones first.
Definitely vital. Her siblings that share history, and her husband, Mark Rometty. The source includes some charming stories about them.
The blind date, the tulip bulbs.
Yeah, they paint a picture of humor and real partnership. His support for her career is emphasized, how he'd be her proxy on office sports teams. His Type Z personality balancing her Type A.
The source also mentions their decision not to have children. How does she frame that?
As a personal choice that shaped the time they had for career and each other, not presented as advice, just part of her reality.
And professionally.
Yeah.
That mosaic of mentors.
She actively cultivated it. And then there was Janice Kaffmeyer. They started as rivals, apparently,
Oh, really?
but became this incredibly close partnership, Batman and Robin, able to give each other that really blunt, necessary feedback. Loyalty to people, to the company, comes through as a strong value.
So that sets the stage for moving into the power of we. How does the source describe that shift?
It's presented as a natural evolution, realizing her actions impacted lots of people, that big achievements aren't solo acts.
And the core idea here is being in service of.
Exactly. It's not just about being nice. It's about understanding that helping others meet their needs is the most effective way to meet your own goals, too.
Is there an example?
Yeah, the grocery retailer story. Instead of just pointing out problems or pushing products, her team really dug in, shared IBM's insights, collaborated on a long-term strategy with the client.
Going beyond the immediate sale.
Way beyond. She talks about preparation being the ultimate compliment you can pay a client in that service mindset, and learning when to say no if something wasn't genuinely right for the client or IBM long-term. That takes strength.
Then there's building belief. Why is that so important?
Crucial for driving big changes, the source uses the PwC consulting merger as the prime example. That was a huge, huge deal.
Secret meetings, lots of skepticism.
Tons of skepticism. Merging a private partnership culture with a big public tech company, people were worried, resistant.
So how did she build belief?
Listening seems key. She spent a lot of time just listening to the PwC consultants, understanding their culture, acknowledging their sense of loss, being genuinely curious. Empathy.
Yes. And getting their leader, Mike Friedman, on board and visibly supportive was critical. The symbolic things helped too, like the "this changes everything" ad campaign and this voicemail about the merger that apparently rang around the world.
But it wasn't smooth sailing, right? Culture clashes.
For sure, like the PwC aversion to direct conflict. The source mentions using a velvet hammer approach, like Bridget Van Kralingen did, to address issues constructively, and fixing real problems fast, like when the consultants weren't getting paid correctly after the merger. Rometty was ready to write personal checks.
Wow, that shows commitment.
It does, and it meant being honest with IBMers, too, about market shifts, painting reality, but also offering hope.
Which leads us into leading major strategic change as CEO. The source says organizations have to change.
Or they cease to be relevant.
Yeah.
But crucially, they can't change so much that it loses its soul. That's the tightrope walk.
Finding that balance. It involves the what, products and services, and the how.
Right, the how, leadership, processes, culture, talent, and that meant making tough calls, like selling off businesses, chip manufacturing.
Exactly. Businesses that weren't core anymore or weren't profitable. Hard, but necessary. And maybe even harder, ditching the old financial roadmap, those strict earnings per share targets.
Even though the stock price dropped.
Yeah. She called the roadmap dead, which she said was a good thing because it freed them up to actually rebuild for the long term, not just chase quarterly numbers.
Bold move.
Mm-hmm.
And then the big bets, AI and cloud.
Huge bets. With AI and Watson, they were essentially trying to create a market. Lots of challenges there, especially in healthcare AI. Constant need for proof points, pivoting.
And cloud.
Cloud was different. They were responding to an existing market, and frankly, they were late. They needed to build a specific kind of cloud, more sophisticated, secure, for big enterprise clients.
So different challenges. Making a market versus entering one late.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both needed serious investment and resilience.
And changing the how involved things like design thinking.
At massive scale, starting with user problems, iterating, building design studios, hiring thousands of designers. It was a fundamental shift in how IBM approached development.
And using data, like Net Promoter Score.
Yeah, using NPS data not just as a score, but to find common client pain points across the whole company, and then getting global teams together to actually fix them, changing how work got done.
It sounds like modernizing greatness.
Yeah.
Figuring out what made IBM IBM.
Like the mainframe, middleware, and enduring platform.
Building on that with new tech like hybrid cloud and AI, while being honest about what wasn't working anymore.
Right. The source makes the point. IBM would be a terrible Google, and Google would be a terrible IBM. It's about being the best IBM for today's world.
This ties into the idea of stewarding good tech, right?
Yeah.
Responsibility.
Yes. It's not just about making cool stuff. It's about values. Thinking about the downsides, potential harm, inequality, impact on democracy, considering all stakeholders.
Which requires that muscle of good power she talks about.
Exactly. The strength to make long-term, values-based decisions. Building trust is part of it. The source mentions IBM publicly refusing government bulk data requests, like with Prism, taking a stand.
And inclusion is framed as part of this stewardship, too.
Absolutely. IBM has a long history there, but she made it concrete. Grading managers on D&I results, tying executive pay to progress, holding leaders accountable.
Like the Latin America example in the source.
Right. It wasn't just talk. They aimed for and achieved strong inclusion scores and representation. She also reflects on being a role model for women, maybe unintentionally at first, but accepting that responsibility.
Okay, so all this leads to the power of us looking outward at societal change. And the focus shifts heavily to skills first.
Yeah, this feels like a culmination. The big tension she sees is ensuring the future works for everyone, not just a select few. Tackling unequal access to good jobs.
And this is where the challenge to the traditional college degree comes in strongly.
Very strongly. She realized the barrier often isn't aptitude, it's access to that degree. The source mentions the barbell effect, hollowing out middle-income jobs, and even the deaths of despair, book-linking lack of opportunity to mortality rates. It's presented as a critical societal issue.
So skills first is the proposed solution, valuing skills over degrees.
That's the core idea. In hiring, learning, promotion, it's a mindset shift, she argues, and needs systemic change involving employers, educators, government. Things like learning agility, growth mindset, those become key.
How did IBM implement this internally?
They really questioned degree requirements for roles, rewrote job descriptions to focus on actual skills needed, removed biased language.
And measured the results.
Critically, yes. They found non-degreed hires performed as well or better, learned more on the job, stayed longer. That data was powerful, and applications from underrepresented groups went way up.
But it wasn't just internal hiring, right? Creating new pathways.
Exactly, like P-Tech high schools.
Explain that model again.
It's a public-private partnership. Students get a high school diploma plus a free associate degree in a relevant tech field, plus workplace experience, mentoring, often leading straight to a job at IBM or another partner company.
The source has examples like Gabriel Rosa, Alyssa Sandy,
Yeah, showing it works.
eh,
And IBM scaled it globally, not as charity, but as a business imperative, building their future talent pool.
and apprenticeships.
Another key pathway: paid learning on-the-job training plus coursework plus mentoring. The Tony Bird story is great coffee shop worker, applied multiple times, became a successful software engineer apprentice. Experiential learning is powerful.
Returnships, too, for people coming back to work.
Yes, like her sister Annette's experience, creating on-ramps.
What pushed this towards becoming a broader societal mission?
The source links it to the growing awareness of deep racial and economic inequalities, especially after national protests. Ken Fraser's quote is powerful. "We should do what business does best, provide jobs."
And the stark data on wealth gaps, degree attainment for Black Americans.
Right. It underscored the realization talent is everywhere, opportunity is not.
Which led to co-founding 110.
Yes, a huge, ambitious goal. Get companies to hire, promote, and advance 1 million Black individuals without four-year degrees into family-sustaining jobs in 10 years.
Wow, that requires massive change.
Total co-creation, she calls it. Businesses changing hiring, skills developers adapting, individuals learning new skills, using jobs as the currency for change.
The core message being that skills first is a necessary shift for everyone. We all have to grow into roles.
Pretty much, it's about potential and continuous learning, not just the piece of paper you started with.
So wrapping up, the source brings it back to resilience, to the spirit of good power.
Yeah, that ability to push through setbacks, criticism, crises. It comes from relationships, from attitude.
She mentions handling that stock drop news publicly.
Right. Owning it, being direct, and sensing empathy from the audience because of it. Resilience in action.
What a journey the source lays out, from those incredibly tough beginnings shaping her resilience.
To leading a giant company through massive change.
And then using that platform to advocate for systemic change around skills and opportunity.
It really paints good power as something earned, not given. Built through service, belief, smart change, responsibility, inclusion, and that underlying resilience.
It definitely makes you reflect on your own journey, doesn't it? Your roots, your learning, your support systems, the changes you face.
For sure. And the impact you can potentially have.
So, the final thought to leave people with, maybe it's this. In our world, which is always changing, always throwing new information at us, and where opportunity still isn't equal,
Yeah.
what difference could adopting a skills-first mindset make? Not just for your own future, but maybe, like Ginni Rometty's story suggests, for the future of others around you too.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.